So I thought I didn't go into quite enough detail in my former video on this same topic, which is just one video back about Nintendo's console update and, their Yulia update and why it's such a massive concern in this. Now, there are technical terms that you would need to understand to really get at this, but essentially, and how this might be accomplished. Okay, the way that the internet routes data around, is by the deployment and sending of packets back and forth inside these, inside these encapsulated, data packets that it uses to send data back and forth and everything, and there's a whole, for trying to remember the industry insider terms for it, but there's layers that it uses as it travels along the OSI layers, that it uses to travel back and forth between all this and everything. But what's really important and really gets to the point is that there's something, there's a piece of software called packet sniffers, and the type of software, it's basically known as a packet analyzer or protocol analyzer or network analyzer. And uh, this type of software is not particularly difficult to do and to utilize, at least on your own network and everything. And while it may be illegal to sniff somebody else's packets or such, you can totally legally, without getting in trouble, utilize a packet sniffer on uh, traffic that's taking place in your own network and on your own network. While it would be illegal to break in to use the data that you gathered in order to brick people's systems, it can be used by. It still can be utilized, and if you know your way around networking, you can really. The law really is an afterthought when it comes to the internet, because hiding your own traffic is really just a trivial matter with something like OVPN, a logless VPN provider to send the signal through, and then snarfing it through something like proxy chains. You've got all that ability to mask your traffic when you're doing this in such a way that it can be routed all everywhere on the world multiple times. Some of them, if they go to and try to send with even armed with a warrant, they just don't keep that data on hand for a very long period of time. But so a packet sniffer is what you would utilize in order to do what I'm talking about, which it said, I don't know what means Nintendo has to detect such activity and kill the console, but figuring that out would simply be a matter of using a packet sniffer, you know, to intercept that traffic. And, once you have captured it, it's just a matter of knowing how to feed it into ChatGPT to write tools and software for you, basically, to send those data packets to your own switch that you use to test this. And through this process of capturing, the incoming signals that come to your switch by Nintendo servers, you can eventually reverse engineer the entire, communications protocol that Nintendo is using. So if Nintendo builds a backdoor into the switch that enables them to brick it, it's only really going to be a matter of using a packet sniffer. And this is the kind of situation where the most popular of them is Wireshark, but there's a bunch of other ones. It's essentially a, bring your own, or you can even build your own if you know how, kind of situation. Sniffers work by examining streams of data that flow between computers on a network, or which, in this case, the Nintendo Switch technically counts as a computer. Even though some people might object to that terminology being used for it, but it is on a network as well as between network computers and the larger internet. You know, it's not as though people who know their way around a soldering iron, too, if presuming that there aren't easy way to do this, but anybody with a soldering iron can definitely get some tools together to, sit between the Wi-Fi antenna of the switch, and stream its data to a laptop like this one. That too can be reverse engineered by somebody with the soldering skills if it is not easy to do, but it's probably not going to be that difficult. You might just need to have, a router that has a packet sniffer inside of it, inside the router software that will enable you to search, for Nintendo servers inside the packet sniffer. And with this packet sniffer and analyzer, you are able to essentially identify the Nintendo's communications to a test switch that you use here. And once you capture enough data, you can start to analyze it and then feed it into ChatGPT or write it yourself. But once you do that, you can write the commands it's sending into it and then send them to your test switch and see how it responds to these commands. And through this process, you are effectively able to reverse engineer the communications protocol that Nintendo uses to break people's switches, which means their in-house tools are 100% vulnerable to being, to packet sniffing and analysis being used to reverse engineer the protocols that Nintendo uses to control people's switches remotely. And then software can be written to essentially send the same signals by people who aren't Nintendo, and that's why this Tech Dirt article is so concerning, is that we know a lot about this, and we know that it would be relatively trivial ultimately to write software that completely, and even the whole process that you'd go through when writing it to reverse engineer the protocol that the Nintendo used to do this. And before long, this protocol will be well known to the whole bloody internet. If you do this and you go down this route, especially if you provide documentation to GitHub, it's really, and there will be, if you were to do this, presumably there would likely be legitimate uses for it, as well as potentially nefarious ones, in terms of what commands that protocol was able to send. And so this is, like I said, it's a security nightmare. There is no process that Nintendo can use to build in software to remotely break people's switches that cannot be piggybacked on top of by malicious hackers. There's no way to accomplish it.